Now, we've reached the conclusion of our series on the Mummy franchise, and I just have to say that each series brought its own unique charm, and I thoroughly enjoyed getting to watch each of these individual series, and I appreciated what the directors and the cast were able to bring, and I think independently, no one series is bad. Not all of them follow the specific recipe that I think a mummy movie should follow, given the original context, but every movie is at least entertaining, and that's really what these movies are supposed to be. Now, I've got just a couple jumbled comments about the franchise that I need to get out there too. All that is the Mummy franchise had its start in a treatment written by Nina Wilcox Putnam and Richard Scher. The treatment was called Cagliostro and was originally set in San Francisco about a 3,000-year-old magician who survived using nitrate injections. Now, I've reached out to Universal Studios a couple of times in the last year, trying to convince them to release a digital copy of this treatment to the public, as it's not currently available, at least to the best of my internet sleuthing abilities. Unfortunately, they have never responded to any of my requests. Maybe we can start a petition someday. Anyway, all of these movies rely on Egypt mania, and the same with Asia and Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. It's all sourced in fascination and fantasy. So, on one hand, we have to acknowledge that they do not do the cultures all that accurate of justice. And on the other hand, we can accept that these movies are what they are, simply for entertainment. Cultural fascination like this can be a good thing, but can also bring some harm. Thankfully, newer series have managed to skirt away from any real cultural issues. I think this might be particularly because of the time period they largely use, and partially because the mummies are largely the only real characters in the movie that are Egyptian. Speaking of which, in all this time, our use of music to represent Egypt has hardly changed at all. It feels like now that we have nearly 100 years of mummy movies and Egypt being represented, the studios are still choosing nearly identical music. I don't really have a point here, it's just something I noticed and I wanted to point out. Now let's talk about adaptations, those being novels, comics, film and TV, video games, as well as theme park rides, and there are a lot. Let's start with novels. We only have two of them. We have Universal Monsters, The Mummy, Book of the Dead by Larry Mike Garman, which is book 4 of a 6-part series all based on Universal Classic Monsters and written for middle grade readers. This particular book was published in 2002 and does not appear to be in print anymore. Then we have The Mummy, Dark Resurrection by Michael Payne, published in 2006 but is no longer in print, which follows Ardith Bey, who is the living mummy Imhotep, and two siblings who open Ankh-Es and Amun's tomb. It seems to be an average rating and is written more for the adult audience. And then we have comics. Universal Monsters, The Mummy by Dark Horse Comics was published in 1993, and its synopsis follows, quote, "The horrific story of an obsession that would not die." Faithfully adapted from the Universal Studios film, this is the haunting story of Ardith Bey and his love for the Princess Anck-su-namun. An unholy love that reaches out from beyond death and into your nightmares. Our second adaptation is the 1959 Hammer series release as a comic book, which was published in 1978 in a magazine. The comic was the focus of the entire magazine and was supported by overviews of the Hammer Mummy movies with analysis and breakdown. There's also a web manga adaptation titled The Mummy, Dark Stories. This was supposed to be a spin-off following the release of the 2017 movie, but it looks like the first one was released. It can be found on the Internet Archive, but I was only able to find the first of the series, and I could only find it in Japanese. I would guess it was canceled, along with all the other plans they had at the time. This is a big letdown for me, but the art looks fantastic, and it probably could have been a great story. Then we have the upcoming Universal Monsters, The Mummy by Faith Erin Hicks. This will be a series that will start to be released March 26th of this year, 2025. The webpage for the comic, which I will link in the notes, says Helen Crossnover is a woman born to two worlds and belonging in neither, forever haunted by a cursed encounter as a child. When unknown voices bring her back to an Egyptian dig site from her past, Helen will unknowingly play an unexpected role in the rise of the monster known only as the Mummy. Film and TV is the next category. The only TV adaptation of the franchise is The Mummy, the animated series, which ran from 2001 to 2003. I feel like I have the faintest memories of seeing this show, but it would have only ran when I was between 6 and 8 years old. It aired on Kids WB Network, and in its second season, it was renamed The Mummy: Secrets of the Magi. This show is an alternative sequel to the Sommer series movie and ran for a complete 2 seasons with a total of 26 episodes before it was cancelled. In the show, the O'Connell son Alex gets a different version of Manacle than what we see in The Mummy Returns, and the adventure follows that Imhotep is after him and the Manacle. The Scorpion King series, which has released 5 films between 2002 and 2018, is also a spin-off of the Sommer series, with Dane Johnson reprising his role as the Scorpion King only in the first film. The movie series is also being rebooted, with an announcement that came in 2020, but as of yet, details are limited. What we do know is that Jonathan Herman will be writing the story, and Dwayne Johnson is one of the producers. The plot will take place in modern day and is a joint venture between Universal Pictures and 7 Bucks Productions. Now on to video games, and I gotta say, there were probably twice as many video games as I dared even hope. Our first video game was The Mummy, which released on PlayStation and Microsoft Windows. It's a platformer released in 2000, based mostly on the first film. It starts off after Evie resurrects Imhotep. The game is set in Hamunaptra, and there are 15 stages. There's also a bonus stage called Cairo, and you play as Rick O'Connell, and you have to defeat enemies such as slave mummies and scarab beetles. The same game was redeveloped for the Game Boy Color, and as you can imagine, it has a much more limited capacity given the console, and you are instead playing it as a side-scroller like the old-school Mario games. Then you have The Mummy Returns, which released on PS2 and Game Boy Color. This action-adventure game is based on the second movie, and you play as Rick or Imhotep fighting for your own ends. And then there's The Mummy, the animated series video game, released in 2002. It's an action-adventure game developed by Ubisoft for the Game Boy Advance and by HIP Interactive for the PS2 and PC, and is based on the TV series. Tomb of the Dragon Emperor also got a video game adaptation, and this one released on PS2, Wii, and mobile. The mobile version had a different developer though, and since this was 2008, you can imagine it looked very different from the console counterpart. The game also follows the movie's story. The Mummy Demastered was released in 2017 and styled as a Metroidvania. It takes place at the same time as the 2017 The Mummy with Tom Cruise, but you are put in as playing one of the soldiers of the organization. You fight Amenet's forces. The Scorpion King also received 2 video game adaptations, the first being Scorpion King Sword of Osiris. As you can imagine, it's based on the Scorpion King movie. It's actually set after the events of the film, and you need to recover the Sword of Osiris to defeat the bad guys. And the second one, Rise of Arcadian, which released on PlayStation 2 and Nintendo GameCube. This game is actually a prequel to the first Scorpion King movie, and you're battling it out with Egyptian gods. Our adaptations leave off with the theme park attractions. There's a roller coaster ride named Revenge of the Mummy in Universal Studios theme parks, Florida, with some similar rides in both Hollywood and Singapore. And a portion of the upcoming Universal Epic Universe Park in Orlando will be called The Dark Universe and will feature the Mummy among other classic monsters. No exact details that I can find as to what that will look like yet. Let's get into future and canceled movies. There was going to be a 4th installment in the Sommer series titled The Mummy 4: Rise of the Aztecs. Brendan Fraser and the cast of the 3rd film had signed up for the sequel, and Antonio Banderas would have played the main antagonist. It was even rumored that Rachel Weisz would have reprised her role. However, the film was cancelled in favor of the reboot of The Mummy in 2017, which was meant to be the first chapter in the Dark Universe interconnected movies featuring the classic movie monsters such as The Mummy, Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, and Wolfman, the creature from the Black Lagoon, and Frankenstein. However, due to the critical and commercial failure of The Mummy, all other proposed movies were eventually scrapped. Following this disaster, Brendan Fraser reportedly said that he would still be interested in returning to the franchise. I guess we can all still hold out hope. We can probably surmise that they will never be a sequel to the Tom Cruise movie. Universal Studios has made it very clear that while some monster movies will continue to be produced, they will not be pursuing the interconnected universe. There is, however, a confirmed reboot to the franchise yet again, currently just titled The Mummy, set to release in 2026, and it was revealed on December 20th, 2024. Blumhouse is behind this iteration, and Lee Cronin, which was the writer and director for Evil Dead Rise, is writing and directing this movie. We can very easily surmise that this could be the most visually and technically terrifying entry in the series yet, and I, for one, am thoroughly excited. I only hope that we can get both this movie and a part 4 to the Somber series at the same time. I believe in today's world we can get both without it being confusing. This concludes my 4-part series on the Mummy franchise. I don't hate saying this, but I'm probably going to try and go back and purchase what copies I can of all the adaptations, from the video games to the comics. I kind of want to build a little display box of these. Getting to do all this research and watching everything has started me down a path of becoming a super fan of the entire franchise and not just the Somber series. Anyway, thank you so much for checking this series out. This was my first time doing a critical take on a movie series, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't currently have plans to do this on another series at this time, as it's a lot of work, and I need to decide if this was any good at all. Don't forget to let me know what you think is your favorite movie and why.